This morning's agenda is very interesting. We will have some speakers. Before we get into the speakers, I will go to James, and who has a small Slido thing that will be coming, and he will ask you to make your opinions known. But if you look at the workshop, we have the icebreaker. We have Brian O'Gallagher from UCC, who I'll introduce in a moment. We have Mark Foley, CEO of AirGrid, Bill Kelly, Community Power. We have questions and answers. We have a breakout session, which we will lead you through, and then we will take the feedback and conclusions, and hopefully ending around 12 o'clock. It's really important that you participate and give your views. Irish Rural view is very simple. We need to get this right. We need to make sure that communities are happy with the changes, particularly in renewable energy, particularly with the type of electricity we're going to have over the rest of the century. So without further ado, I will begin by asking James, just before I leave that, the housekeeping, as you can see on your slide, it is recorded, not the breakout sessions. Please keep your microphones off unless you're speaking. Rename yourself with the name organization if you're representing one, and please write in the chat. It's extremely important that even if you don't manage to get through for various reasons, that what you think is recorded, and if it's recorded in the chat, then we will have a record of it, and we will be able to use it for further deliberations. And of course, raise your hand to speak. Hopefully, in this great new virtual life that we're all living in, things will go as they should. But if not, as I said, your names are with us. You're always free to contact the AirGrid website or to contact Irish Rural Link if you feel your views are not properly heard. So, without further ado, I'll ask James Claffey, who works with us here in Irish Rural Link, to start the proceedings with a small icebreaker, and I hand the screen over to you, James.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks very much, Seamus, for that introduction. As Seamus says, we hope that technology works this morning, so we're just going to very quickly begin with an icebreaker. If people want to get out their phones or just open up a new tab on their laptop, and if they go to slido.com, and once you get into Slido, it will ask you for a code. And then we're just going to answer this question. So if people can do that, please. And it's, as James says, it's just an icebreaker to get to kind of a starting point for today. So if people go to slido.com and enter in the code very quickly, and you'll see the question come up for you, and we'll give people about a minute to do that. We have our first answer in. Strongly agree. And we'll just give people about 30 seconds to do that, Seamus, and then I will hand it back to you. And as Seamus said, we are recording all of this today, but the breakout groups are not recorded. So people, please feel free to express your views. We will have facilitators to guide you through the process and take notes as well. And as Seamus said, please use the comment section at the bottom of your screen. If you don't feel comfortable, or maybe would prefer just to type in comments or questions, please do that. We are going to record them all. So we have a couple of responses coming in. So I'm just going to take this down and we'll just review it very quickly at the end. So thanks very much for that, Seamus, and I'll pass it back to you then for the first presentation.
So the first presentation is no stranger to this subject and to Irish Rural Link. His name is Professor Brian O'Gallagher, Professor of Energy Engineering at UCC. He has been a professor and the director of MARE, the SFI Research Centre for Energy, Climate and Marine. He leads the research on building and using energy systems models that have underpinned Irish and EU energy, climate mitigation policies and energy company strategies. He's also MRE's Education and Public Engagement Champion, received the Science Foundation Ireland Best International Engagement Award 2020. He's elected chair of the International Energy Agency Technology Collaboration Programme on Energy Systems Modelling, and as elected fellow of the Irish Academy of Engineering. Brian is an extremely good font of knowledge in all of this area, as you will see. So Brian, if I can hand over the screen to you, you're very welcome. You may begin your presentation.
I'm delighted to be here for this important event. So thanks very much, Seamus. I think this is a very important consultation that's underway by EirGrid, and I commend them for doing that. And I'm looking forward to hearing Mark's reflections. I'm going to take a step back and look at where this comes from. So the question I'm going to address in this presentation is, why are we increasing renewable electricity? A lot of the focus on the consultation will relate to the how, the where, and the details around that. But as I say, I want to take a kind of helicopter view on where this is coming from. And just briefly to introduce to those of you who are not aware of who MARI is, we're the Science Foundation Ireland Research Centre for Energy, Climate and Marine. So Science Foundation Ireland have established 17 research centres of scale in Ireland, and our focus in our research is on the energy transition, climate action and the blue economy. And our goal is to do excellent research in these areas that has maximum societal impact. And the way in which we measure our impact is in terms of how we support industry, how we inform policy, and how we empower society. So we have about 220 researchers around the country in 13 institutes, working with about 80 industry partners on a range of topics, research topics related to these, to questions related to the energy transition, to climate action and the blue economy. And in addition to that collaborative research we do with industry, we have a very important role in informing policy decisions and also empowering society. We've developed a number of methods for engaging with citizens and communities, and also for supporting citizens and communities. Two examples being the Imagining 2050 project and the Dingle Peninsula 2030 project. The focus today, though, is on, as I mentioned, this high-level perspective as to where this is all coming from. Climate science is very clear in telling us that climate change is happening. And in fact, we know this ourselves from observing what the changes that we've seen in the last number of years. So some of the manifestations of climate change are increased rainfall, increased extreme weather events, rising global temperatures internationally. And the impacts of climate change are visible in Ireland, but they're actually much more visible and impactful in other parts of the world in terms of the impacts of climate change to date. So in many ways, what we've observed in Ireland is at the lower end of the scale compared to what's been observed elsewhere. And what's been observed elsewhere gives us a good sense of what's to come if we don't put a stop to climate change. Because the other thing that's key to climate change is that it's, and again, the climate science is very clear on this, it's because of what we're doing on the planet. And this shows one picture of that, which is a graph of the growth in carbon dioxide emissions globally since the Industrial Revolution. So you can see on the bottom here, the scale of this graph goes back in time, quite a significant period, back to 1760. And from the 1850s onwards, which is when the Industrial Revolution kicked off, initially in Europe, what we've seen is a growth in greenhouse gas, in this case, carbon dioxide emissions. And carbon dioxide emissions are the emissions associated with burning fossil fuels. So we burn coal, peat, gas, and oil, and that releases carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere. And what that results in is an increase in the layer of greenhouse gas emissions that are in the upper atmosphere, and which have been maintaining global temperatures over time on the planet to enable effectively us to live our lives, plants to grow, etc., through a natural effect called the greenhouse effect. And so since the world was first formed, we have had a greenhouse effect which has enabled life on the planet as we know it. The problem is that since the 1850s, we've increased the concentration of some of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and this has led to enhanced global warming and has led to the impacts of climate change associated with that I talked about previously. So it's in this way that what we're doing on the planet is directly linked to the climate change that we're causing. In recent years, increasingly citizens have been seeking, calling for, demanding action. We need to stop doing what we're doing so that we won't destroy the planet and so that we won't destroy our livelihoods. We don't want to face into the uncertain future weather conditions that are caused by climate change. So we want to stop greenhouse gas emissions. And as I say, the citizens, young and old, have been calling for action. In particular, we've been particularly called to task by our younger generations in a very brave way to make us sit up and think and make us act and make us do things differently. And the response, and this is a response that was articulated in the climate bill in Ireland that was produced last week, the government leaders have responded in terms of a significant increase in ambition. And what's shown here, the blue line shows just for Ireland, what the greenhouse gas emissions have been in the period 1990 up to 2020. And we see the dramatic changes that are required, that are being enshrined now in legislation. It's a climate bill, so it's not yet an act, but the intent is very clear. We want to halve our greenhouse gas emissions in Ireland by 2030 and get rid of the other half by 2050, relative to what they were in 2018. So this is a significant change we've seen in government leadership in terms of ambition. But how do we achieve that? Well, we need to look at where Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions are happening in order to understand how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this gives a representation of Ireland's current greenhouse gas emissions. And a number of things stand out, particularly the role of agriculture is quite significant. It's much more significant than most of our EU, fellow EU member states. This isn't because necessarily that we do things badly. We produce a lot of beef and dairy products and we export 90% of them. But essentially the cows belch here, so the enteric fermentation, which captures that, the methane that's released happens in Ireland. We also see road transport is a significant part of our greenhouse gas emissions in terms of the emissions released from cars and trucks largely. We have a significant proportion from our homes as well. And if you look at the top left, you see the role of electricity production. And that's the focus of what we're talking about today. So we have a significant share of our greenhouse gas emissions in Ireland come from electricity production. And if we want to look at how to reduce emissions in energy, be it in electricity production, in our homes or in transportation, a key part of that is to reduce energy use, to increase energy efficiency, and also then to replace fossil fuel energy with renewable energy. And electricity can play a key role in two ways. We can reduce the emissions in electricity production, shown on the top left, by changing from fossil fuels to renewable electricity generation. We can also increase the amount of electricity we use in non-traditional end uses. So for example, we can use electricity for road transport through electric vehicles. We can use more electricity in our homes for home heating using heat pumps. So in that way, if we reduce emissions in electricity, and if we transfer some of the transport and home heating to electricity, then we can effectively, that's a core part of our effective strategy arsenal available to us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'm not going to talk today about reduction of emissions in agriculture. My focus is on the energy piece, which, as you can see, if you exclude agriculture from this graphic, it's about 2/3 of our energy is associated, 2/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions are associated with energy use in its different forms. So as I mentioned, there are many options and many opportunities. We have a particular strength in terms of our resource in Ireland in wind energy, and significant technology developments and innovations have taken place over the last 30 years, meaning we can harness that energy with wind turbines. And these wind turbines can be onshore or they can be offshore. And as the wind blows, the blades on the turbine turns, and that turning motion can be used to generate electricity, and hence harness the energy that's in the wind. There are many other options and opportunities, such as ocean wave energy. There's a company in Cove, you can see, who have developed this device in the top left. Solar energy, you can see the photovoltaic panels on a roof. As I mentioned as well, the bottom left here, we can use the ambient air with electricity through a heat pump to heat our homes. And we can also use biomass, which can be in solid form like this wood, or it can be in liquid or gaseous forms. So with many options and many opportunities in order to transform our energy system from a fossil fuel-based system into a renewable-based system. Neste oil is otherwise known as renewable diesel. It was first developed commercially in Ireland in the oil refinery. It's now used extensively in Sweden. That's an option for heavy goods vehicles. Using hydrogen, so harnessing the power of wind energy and using it to produce hydrogen, can enable us to use that electricity to generate a gaseous form, a gas form of energy, which can be used in trucks or in heating systems. This truck here uses compressed natural gas, which can be displaced by compressed biomethane, which is a renewable source. And we also have, as I mentioned, electric vehicles. So we've many options and many opportunities. So why are we focusing on one part of our strategy on renewable electricity? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have lots of it. So this shows a wind energy atlas for Europe. And the areas of purple are the areas where you've got the really highest resource. And you can see both in terms of onshore and offshore wind energy, our resource is the envy of Europe. So we have significant resource available to us. We're also very good at it. This shows a picture of the growth in renewable electricity as a share of overall electricity consumption up to 2019 from SEAI. And the green part of this is the electricity that's been generated from wind. We are now world leading in terms of the amount of wind energy on an isolated power system. We are world leading. The EirGrid have done phenomenal work. And at the moment, we can, at any instant, absorb 70% of our electricity from wind. And over a year, that's balanced out. And in 2020, which isn't shown on this graph, we got up to 40%. So essentially, that brings me to the close of my presentation. What I wanted to show you was that effectively where this is coming from is that climate change is happening. It's due to what we're doing in terms of the pollution that we're causing. One area in which we're releasing those emissions is in energy. one part of the solution in energy is to reduce emissions in electricity and to use electricity increasingly for heat and transport. And that's a core plank of current government strategy. And this requires our power system to be able to absorb increasing amounts of renewable electricity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Indeed, Brian, thank you for that. Just to remind people, please get the chat box filled up, get your questions in. I see the odd one coming in already. And keep, as you come across observations and questions, don't be afraid to do that. That was a very interesting presentation. We will have a question time after the three guests have spoken, so you will have time to ask some questions. I'd now like to introduce you to Mark Foley, the EirGrid Group Chief Executive. Mark joined EirGrid as Group Chief Executive in June 2018. He has a background working with Coillte, working with the Dublin Airport Authority, and has a huge, I suppose, knowledge in the whole area of public sector management and provision of infrastructure, etc. Mark takes on a great challenge as head of EirGrid, and in a time that is challenging in terms of electricity provision, etc. So Mark, I know you bring great enthusiasm to this position and to this job, and I know this from hearing you and the passion you bring as well. So I think it's a great pleasure to introduce all of you to Mark Foley. Mark, the screen is yours.
Look, thank you very much, Seamus, and to Irish Rural Link for the kind invitation for us to talk about the critical matter of shaping our electricity future. Professor Gallagher has done a super job in framing it, so he makes my job somewhat easier. You now know why we have to do this, and I think let me bring you through the EirGrid narrative of what we need to do to realise the ambition for 2030. And this is part of our reach out right around the country to get the people of Ireland behind this ambition. Who are EirGrid? We develop and operate the electricity grid. We're not the ESB. It's one of the things I always have to say. We run the transmission system. The ESB runs the distribution system, and I'll explain that a little bit later. But our origins are in the ESB in that we were split off under European directives back in 2006. We're owned by the state, and our job is really to serve electricity users across the island of Ireland, because of course we own the business in Northern Ireland, and we have an integrated power system across the whole country, which are often described by Simon Coveney as the exemplar case study in North-South cooperation since the Good Friday Agreement. Our job is to operate the electricity system and critically to plan the system of the future. And that's really what today is all about. How does the grid work? Very simply, and I hope this very elegant graph be prepared by others, certainly not me. On the left-hand side, generation companies generate electricity, whether it's fossil fuel-based, whether it's wind farms, whether it's solar farms, whatever else. The generators are their own community at the front end of this. We then run the transmission system. And the transmission system, I like to use the metaphor, it's like the motorways. It brings the large volumes of electricity right throughout the country. And then it's picked up by the ESB in what's called their network, the ESB networks world. And they're the smaller wires, they're the country roads, they're the county roads, they're what take the electricity from the big motorways ultimately to a business or indeed to your own home. So that's how the thing works. Why is electricity a solution to climate change? Because, of course, electricity has historically been very carbon intensive, and it has a very negative, I suppose, context historically, although that context is changing dramatically. So fossil fuels were the great, I suppose, invention 100 years ago. Combined with the invention of electricity, we clearly, the world has seen an extraordinary advances in terms of quality of life arising from electricity. But unfortunately, fossil fuels generate carbon emissions, and part of the great opportunity that electricity presents is that electricity can be greened through the technologies the professor spoke about. And then if you have green electricity, of course, you can then use that electricity for transport, such as electric cars, and indeed for heating homes. So it offers not just a solution in one domain, but actually it can expand into other domains such as heat and transport. So electricity is really at the heart of Ireland's ambition. The government has asked us to prepare the grid so that at least 70% of renewables can come from renewable sources by 2030. And why do I think this is achievable? And I'd say for a number of reasons. Look at the journey we've travelled to the end of 2020, when soon we'll report over 40% renewables on the power system. 15 years ago, back in the late 2000s, when Minister Ryan and his party were in government and set that ambition, I would suggest very few people believed it was possible, that it was ever going to happen. It has happened. It has been delivered. We're halfway on the journey, and there is a phenomenal ecosystem in our country of engineers, scientists, developers, environmentalists, etc., who have made that happen. So that gives me the confidence that we can go the next part of this journey to 2030 and have a power system that's substantially run by renewables. This is the original Climate Action Plan from 2019 under what at the time was Richard Bruton's watch. And this, of course, is under review by the government as we speak. And of course, the Climate Action Bill landed last week, and that sets a doubling of ambition from what was in the original Climate Action Plan. And just to show you, back in 2019, early 2020, electricity was being asked to basically carry the substantive load, or the biggest part of Ireland's ambition. So it's broken with electricity at 7.5 million tonnes in reduction, transport 4.5, built environment 2.5. You can read the rest, but you can see that the emphasis has been in electricity, and of course the cascading effect into transport. Now this is going to be a different graph, I suspect, in a couple of months' time, when the minister has turned his Climate Action Bill into very specific and firm targets. And I'm expecting we'll start to see more demands in some of the other sectors that are on the page there. What does the electricity grid that EirGrid's responsible for the transmission system is ubiquitous. It's all over the country. And I think one of the important points about the grid is that much of it is decades old, because of course it was done at a time when planning requirements were shall I say, not as onerous, and it was an easier proposition to do, and much more so than it is today. So these are the highways for electricity. You can see they're in every sort of corner of Ireland, north to south. And the grid today, on an all-Ireland basis, carries about 5,000 megawatts of renewable energy between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And the challenge, in order to deliver this 70%, is that we've to add another 10 gigawatts, or 10,000 megawatts. So we've got to do in 10 years twice what we did in the previous 15 to 20 years. And you can see from the graphic, the renewables will be located in a quite dispersed way right across the country, from an onshore perspective, south to southeast from a solar perspective, and of course the phenomenal opportunity that is presented to Ireland by the east coast from Dundalk to Arklow, where offshore wind can be built very cost effectively on the sandbanks out there. So to achieve the objective we've spoken about with offshore wind, onshore wind and solar, we're going to have a better grid in order to do this. And this Shaping Our Electricity Future seeks to try and get the conversation going about the best approach to getting the right grid solution to join the dots and to get the generation from where it's from where generation is happening to the demand sources around the country. What we've put forward here in this particular conversation is 4 approaches. And that's not to say there couldn't be another approach, but we've given this our very, very best shot. And we've put 4 approaches out called generation-led, developer-led, technology-led, and demand-led. And I will speak to each of those very, very shortly. And this is not about picking a solution, a silver bullet, and off we go. The inevitable nuances and complexities around this will suggest, I would put forward the thesis that elements of all of those particular options may very well need to be deployed. It's never about one option. In this particular process, what we're trying to do, I suppose, is really sponsor the notion of partnership. We cannot do this on our own. So we need to work with others, with the whole ecosystem, from government to policymakers, but most importantly, frankly, if we don't get the public on our side, then we run the very, very real and manifest risk of failure. Because ultimately, it's the public who will, I hope, vote in favour of the offshore wind farm, the onshore wind farm, or the new transmission line that we will have to build. And the critical part of this process is to put all the information out in a transparent and open way and ask people, come and engage with it. There is no other data other than what we've put out. We've been very honest, we've been very open, we've been very transparent, and we're really appealing to people. Engage with the documentation, engage with us, and make this part of your solution and not just the EirGrid solution. What is generation led? It's a very, I suppose, simple concept which says, let the planners or the policymakers decide where to put the generation. And part of that logic is not having a free-for-all, but having generation, for example, located close to where the demand is. Perfect example being putting offshore wind on the East Coast and connecting it into the greater Dublin area, where of course you have the biggest demand for electricity in the country. So we've posited this as one particular approach called generation led, and we've articulated in our documentation typically the amount of projects, the cost, the mix between solar, onshore, onshoring and offshore, etc. Option 2 is what's called developer-led. Let's be clear about developer-led. This is what has got us to the great success of 2020. And this is where the developers themselves decide where they're going to put the project, and they go through the planning process, etc. And EirGrid provides them with a grid connection offer. Again, to emphasize, it has got us to 2020. There is a big question mark over whether this approach can get us to 2030, because allowing the continued thesis that a developer can put a project wherever they deem appropriate is questionable, because what it does do is it drives an awful lot more projects, it drives more grids, it may in fact lead to more megawatts than actually needed. And we do have to be honest enough to ask the question at this juncture as to whether this is a viable model going forward. Our third model is what's called technology-led, and it's a little bit out of the box because it's looking at technologies and cabling that type of technology that's used in offshore wind farms, and looking to move electricity, from the West Coast, where there's very significant wind resource, to Dublin, maybe using underground lines, etc. So it's really about the mass movement of energy and the deployment of technology. It's quite an expensive option, and it's one that may be difficult in terms of the critical timeline, which of course is delivered by 2030. And then the last is what we call demand-led. You'll have read and you'll have heard a lot of talk about data centers. On one hand, they consume huge amounts of electricity. On the other hand, we have had the great social experiment and revolution of the last 12 months working from home, all of which has been enabled by this type of technology. And the fact that we can use video, we can use data, and we can be in an office, but we can be 40 kilometers from our office. So, but there is the issue. Should we look at putting data centers or big energy users in locations that are very close to strong grid, or where, for example, the renewable energy might be next door? So we're putting forward this concept of a demand-led approach where policy would start to influence or inform the location of big electricity users. What we will then do is look at how the approaches compare against a suite of criteria. I won't go into this forensically, and it's all in our documentation, but we're asking questions about how does each model or construct work against different criteria. And you'll see from the color coding that some are better than others when judged against criteria. And of course, one criterion that I think is I think everybody would agree must be met, and that is that we deliver the target of 70% clean electricity by 2030. We cannot have the best plan in the world that fails to deliver by 2030, arguably is a flawed plan. So we will be putting all of these options through the mincer in terms of this type of multi-criteria analysis and listening to the views of stakeholders. What's their view? But this is to get the conversation going. So a couple of other dimensions that I think I've majored a lot on, renewables and on a better grid and the options by which we might create that coherent jigsaw. There's two other dimensions that are really important and tend to be less spoken about. One is, how do we actually run the electricity market? Because the market is a competitive market, and that plays a critical role because, of course, the market needs to incentivize investment, for example. Without investment, this is not going to happen. And then secondly, the professor mentioned the whole issue of how we operate the system. We wonderfully moved from 65 to 70% renewables on the power system as being part of now standard operating procedure, which is a phenomenal achievement. Again, first in the world. And today, the engineers in EirGrid are designing the set of experiments to move from 70 to 75. And I hope by the end of this year, or around the time we conclude all of this work, we'll be talking about 75% renewables on the Irish power system. So very quickly, just to, that's really the point I've made there about operating the electricity system. It is about pushing the boundaries of physics and being able to manage that challenge of a power system that ultimately is moving inexorably towards 100% renewables. And on the market, we won't achieve this unless people are prepared to invest. And we're fortunate. I mean, I think the Irish government has had a very strong policy context for the last 15 years. And what that has meant is that developers who have access to capital, and most of this will be private capital, will be prepared to invest if the policy signals are there. So it's important that the market evolves and that it enables this critical investment. So the four approaches are out there. The underpinning documentation runs to, I think, about 170, 180 pages. I think people have been surprised, not so much by the volume, but by just the quality of what we've put out there, the technical content, and actually the fact that there's the real raw material to have the right conversations. And I'm hoping sincerely that nobody will be able to say to us, well, we can't discuss this because we're missing elements of the data set. It's all out there. And we felt this was an absolute critical foundation stone for this process. If this was going to work, people had to have open book in terms of what the different options mean. What do they mean in your constituency, in your county, where you live, etc. So we want to hear from everybody. This is the most, arguably, I think, the most ambitious consultative process by any state company that I can certainly, I'm 20 odd years in across 3 semi-state companies. I've never seen anything as comprehensive as this. There might have been something that I'm not aware of, but really this is as far a reach out as we can possibly do. If we're dealing at a national level, we're dealing at a regional level, and we're dealing at a local level. And we're touching on business, we're touching on the youth of Ireland, we're touching on industry forums, civic society. I mean, what an incredible idea and achievement the Citizens Assembly has done for Ireland in the last 5 years. We're going to leverage that type of civic society forum, because when the people of Ireland and the Citizens Assembly has proven this, you take 100 ordinary people and you give them access to all of the best information, the correct information, not fake information, and to the best, speakers about these topics. They make extraordinarily mature and far-reaching decisions. And I think they've made 3 such decisions in major matters in the last 5 years. So we're going to do our own version of that. In your area, excuse me, on the southeast, what's coming in your area? Definitely offshore wind. SSE project is very much of Arklow, and of course there's a project further south that Energia as I understand it, are sponsoring. Solar power is coming in your area, and infrastructure, air grid infrastructure is coming, because of course we put the whole jigsaw together. And just to, I suppose, conclude, finally, we've got the usual, I suppose, routes to engagement. We've got the fora we have here today, where, you know, this is a chat. We'll answer any questions you might have. We of course have our portal, consult.airgrid.ie, where you can go in, you can look at information, you can make your own submissions, you can offer your views. We have an email address that you can send information to, or you can even use the post, and you can send us a letter, typed or otherwise, to Shelburne Road. And we need all of this back by the 12th the 14th of June. And really, look, the concept here is 14 weeks of intense engagement. You know, people will always debate whether you should do it for 3 months, 4 months. I think we've got the balance right. If we do this short, sharp 14 sort of week period, and really intensify the conversation, then I think enough people will have enough time to be able to feed in. So with your help, I think, and we do, and this really is an appeal, not just to you, but to you talking to your families when you might hopefully share some of what you've heard today. We have to engage the people of Ireland in this, because the biggest risk, I don't lose sleep over technology. I don't lose sleep over the capital. The capital is out there to do this. I don't lose sleep over the concerns that the airgrid team won't be able to get the power system ultimately to operate at 95%. I think all of those are going to happen. Our track record proves that. What I do worry about is if the people of Ireland don't engage with this and decide this is not for them. And I hope the combination of the professor's narrative around why this is so important and the manifest science underpinning climate breakdown, and the type of solution set that airgrid's putting forward, very much with a listening heart, that I think if you put those two together, I hope the vast majority of people will say, yes, let's have a voice in this, and let's support what the outcome will be. I think that really finishes it. I think that's my conclusion. Thank you very much, Seamus. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mark. And as you rightly say, if we don't engage with the public and public engage with airgrid on this matter, we could on both sides get it wrong. So I think that's a great message to give out this morning. One of the things that has always interested Irish Rural Link is, how do you get communities involved? And I mean, it's been said by many people who founded Irish Rural Link, we were founded because somewhere in the southwest we couldn't, or one community couldn't field a football team, and it was a major disaster, and there was a lot of public complaint at the time, and hence the foundation of Irish Rural Link. So communities are extremely important as to how they can engage, not alone in this debate, but actively engaged in bringing about solutions that are important. And this is why I'm really looking forward to the presentation of Bill Kelly, who is Regional Manager of Community Power. They focus on the training and education of community groups and the preparation and presentation of their energy projects in the RESS auction framework. So Bill, I think your presentation, will be, listened to many people who want to say and are asking the question, how can we get involved? How actually can we do more than just opinionate or talk about it? So Bill, the screen is yours.
So good morning, everybody, and thank you, Seamus, for the opportunity to present. Community power, who are we? We are, our agenda basically is what we are, who we are. We'll talk about RES, and we'll also talk about renewable energy communities and the future as we see it. So community power, we are a community of communities in the energy generation and supply sector. We are 100% community-owned projects, be they wind or solar, and we also have anaerobic digestion and biogas in planning. And we're available at communitypower.ie. Owned and operated by communities for communities, And I'll talk briefly about our current primary projects. They include Templederry Community Wind Farm in Tipperary, operational since 2012. Claremorris Community Solar Farm in Mayo. It was successful in last year's state auction in Res 1, as was Galway Community Renewables near Tuam, also successful in Res 1. And the other company in the group currently is Community Renewable Electricity Supply Trading as Community Power. And in there, we sell electricity from the national grid to farms, homes, and businesses across Ireland. And it's operational since 2018. And we acquired a gas license in November of last year. So I mentioned there we sell electricity nationwide. We offer fair, transparent pricing, 1 month rolling contracts, so customers can leave whenever they wish without an exit fee. And that's our philosophy at domestic level. Commercial and industrial is slightly different. And the money you spend with us stays in Ireland to help communities to generate their own or to develop their own energy generation projects, to avail of the new grid that Mark and Brian have also been talking about prior to me here. We would say to people, you should be the change that you want to see, and you can sign up online at any stage to Community Power. So I'll speak briefly now about our flagship project, Templederry Community Wind Farm. It is a community development initiative, 100% community owned, operating since 2012. It comprises 2.3 megawatt turbines. That's 4.6 in total. That's the equivalent of powering just over 3,000 average size homes. Now, crucially here, the gross annual turnover in Templederry in the 9 years it's been operating has never gone below 1.1 million. It's gone above it, it's never gone below it. And we believe that every parish in Ireland should have something similar, be it wind or solar or a combination of both. That's money coming into your community that your community can control. So who are the feet on the ground at the moment in Community Power? So John Fogarty is our MD, and as is Noel Carey is our finance director. Both John and Noel are founding members of Templederry Community Wind Farm and indeed Community Power. Greg is the general manager. I look after community engagement, and Sarah does marketing. Our office is in Neenah, and as a result of Res 1, we were joined by Claremorris, and a lot of you may know JP Prendergast, who's heading up the Claremorris office and the solar farm there, which is coming on stream later this year. And we expect, as we go forward, we will be joined by many communities around the country. So going straight in to talk about RES, the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. So for those who are unfamiliar with it, it's a state initiative to incentivize the production of renewable electricity. It has an auction-based format, which sees sealed bids invited from qualified generators or potential generators to produce or for specific amount of energy, be it wind or solar, for a specific time period, usually 15 years plus, and at a set price. It was introduced last year, and it's expected to run in its present format for 4 to 5 years. The RES auction, which is run annually, has 2 sections. The community pot, which is 1% of the annual total, and the developer pot, which is 99%. As you can see, there are less onerous conditions to enter the community pot, which is our focus this morning. This here is a slide taken from the Department of Climate Action last year during their roadshow before COVID struck. And you can see here that their view of the market at community level, they're very familiar with our project in Templederry, and what they want to see is multiple Templederrys around the country. Now, I stress here, they're not looking for exact replicas, but they want to see communities up and running in their own wind and solar projects. And they're putting the structures in place to facilitate that. So that's our flagship project in Templederry. we've already been joined by Claire Morris and Tuam coming on stream this year. So a quick overview of the community pot. It's 1% of the total. The maximum project size you can have there is currently 5 megawatts. To put that in perspective, the average home will consume 4.2 megawatts of electricity per annum. So your solar farm or your wind farm can produce up to one house annual consumption in 1 hour, let's say. The project now has to be 100% community owned. And Community Power are lobbying to increase the size of the community pot from 1% up to 10, and to increase the maximum project size from 5 up to, we think, 20. And overall, as we look out into the future, we would like to see the knowledge base within communities expand, widen and deepen, such that communities can enter the developer pot in time. So if you want to become involved in RES, there are some basic steps. The first one is identify a plot of land in your parish, your community. Circa 20 acres for a 5 megawatt solar facility, slightly less for a wind farm. Apply for a grid connection assessment to ESB networks. That will cost you 2,000 plus VAT. That application is effectively getting in the queue for a grid connection and also getting a cost for it, a firm cost for it. And to do that, you'll need written approval from the landowner to have their land assessed, and also ideally have a lease option with the landowner. Now, once you receive your grid connection offer from networks, you're now in the queue and you've got a cost for your grid connection, two vital components to proceed. Now, if your cost for connection is reasonable, you can then proceed to the next stage, which is applying for planning. And once you have that, you can apply to enter the RES auction. So you'll need to go into the auction, your grid offer, your planning permission, your land lease, your community cooperative constitution, which I'll talk about later, and verified financials. Because remember, there's no point building a wind farm or a solar farm unless it's going to make money for your community, right? So you need your financials in order. So prepare and submit the bid. Assuming you're successful in the auction, you'll be offered a state contract, which will take the risk out of it effectively for you, and you can go straight through to construction. And Community Power is available to help communities around the country with any, each, and all of these steps that I've just outlined here. It's hard to impress on people how relatively it is now, rather than heretofore, for communities to become involved. So, sample financials around, let's say, a typical solar farm at community level. Now, we're going to look here at a viable project. And because time is short today, I'm just giving you very much an overview. So expenditure and income. Expenditure on the left-hand side here, we show there the total capital expenditure, and then below that we show total annual expenditure. And the two main figures will say it would not be unrealistic to build a solar farm for 3 million plus, a 5 megawatt solar farm. And you can see there at the bottom of the screen on the left-hand side, we show total annual expenditure. Again, it's a general figure. Each situation is slightly different. But moving to the income scenario, the green box on the right-hand side, we show there an auction bid price at the top, 10 cents per kilowatt. These figures now are in the public domain, by the way. So, and we show at the bottom there the gross revenue. In that type of scenario there, with those figures that we're showing, with gross revenue of 657,000 per annum, you can see that that is a very viable project vis-a-vis your total expenditure. Now, and we are available to go through detailed figures with communities across the country. Now, how might you fund that sort of figure? So, again, this is a for instance and a particular model that we're using now for some of our Res 1, Res 2 projects. Let's say you have a funding requirement of 3.5 million. So I'm showing here now two types of shares that can be issued. So running quickly down through them, A and B type shares. the A share has an ownership option, the B doesn't, or an ownership property built into it. A has voting rights, B doesn't. A has one per person, B has multiple, non-transferable, sample price, the community can determine the price. We usually advise somewhere between 500 and 1,000 per share. A will give a variable dividend, and the board will decide that at any given year. B provides a fixed coupon, which is a fixed rate of return for a fixed number of years, typically 3% in our scenario over a 5, 10, 15-year period. Your target audience for A are locals, and for B, locals and others. So you can see there at the bottom of the screen, if you issue 300 A's at 1,000 each, you get 300,000. If you issue 3,500 B's, 3.5. Total A and B, well over what you need at 3.8 million. If there's a funding shortfall, you have the option of the green bond, community power green bond, and that's available to underwrite financially sound, and I stress financially sound, community-owned projects. Now, going on from there, we'll take a very quick look at Claremorris Solar Park in Res 1. It was a collaboration between the Claremorris community, Community Power, and Mayo County Council. From its inception in 2019 to construction in Q4 2021, 3 years. And that's what we like to see, a nice tidy from construction to production, short timeline. Now, COVID may push this to Q1 of 2022. Having said that, it's still a very timely project. So you can see here, Mayo County Council are welcoming the project on board. Obviously, the local authority are delighted because in this instance, what was a disused landfill site and a bit of an eyesore is now being repurposed as a solar park with walkways. We're reintroducing flora, fauna, bees, etc. And also the community are going to generate a lot of money out of it, but also the council are getting a very tidy annual lease on the land as well. So it's win-win-win all around. And so just briefly on that, we're now working with communities and a number of local authorities around the country on Res 2. So project timelines here. If you look at Temple Derry, it was 10, 11 years from conception to construction. If you look in Res 1 then with Claremorris and Tuam, 2 years for each of those between conception to construction. As I mentioned, COVID might shove that just beyond the 2 years. And now in Res 2, taking one of our Limerick projects as an example, we hope to, COVID notwithstanding, turn that around within 12 months or 12, 14 months. So from conception to construction. So it can be done, so looking at renewable energy communities now, briefly, what are they? That's the generic name for the community-owned company that will enter a bid in a Res auction. It must comply with the rules as laid down by the Department of Climate Action in order to place a bid, or to enter the auction and place a bid. Questions you should ask yourself: how will your REC be structured? Who owns what, and how will it be run? And going on from there, will it have open and inclusive membership? Be transparent in operation, 1 member, 1 vote, meet all the Res requirements and more. Other things that are very important: a constitution that protects against emission drift, and appropriate asset locks to protect the community assets. And obviously we can help and advise on all of those. Other items for consideration. In this slide here, I'm showing how the Res auction and your renewable energy community, how the two of them can interact. For Res, we point out that the first step is identifying a plot of land in your locality. Keep in mind that you don't have to have your legal entity set up from day one. Now, if you have already, that's fine, right? But if you're putting your toe in the water, really what you need is 3 or 4 community-focused, committed individuals to do a bit of legwork. So you can invite in the public into the project at various stages. Obviously, it won't qualify for RES unless it is truly transparent and community owned, but you don't have to let all the community in day one. Now, and the reason I say that is if you don't, there's no guarantee you're going to get into RES, so you may not want to raise expectations too high at an early stage. But it best to approach it in a relatively low-key way. You can get a lot of work done. And as you get, we say to a lot of people, once you get your grid assessment offer from networks and you know what price it's going to be and the timeline, that's a good time to start letting people know that you're in business. Right? Moving on from there, the future, as we see it, in 2012, pre-res, it was just Temple-Derry. 2020, we're joined by Claremorris and Galway. In 2021, we have 30 communities, just over 30, approaching Res 2. Now, not all of them will make Res 2 because some of their planning permissions may not be true or completed, but the spillover will go into Res 3 and beyond. And we would say to communities across the country, be part of the movement. It's an alternative economic development model. We see it as enriching communities economically, socially, and culturally while we save the planet. And to look at that graphically, where we see things going, 2020, there's three communities, should I say, true res, effectively. In 2021, there will be, we expect 10, and that's in Res 2. In 2022, with Res 3, we would see a multiple of that in Res 3 and growing on out then in Res 4, etc. Keep in mind that any and all of those communities, whereas they will own their own local generation project, they have the option of part ownership of the electricity resale company, such that if you decide to buy your power from Community Power, you'll own part of it, and the revenue from that, in addition to your generation project, will stay local. And that is the future as we see it. The next steps, we would say to communities across the country, get in the queue, submit your grid assessment, grid connection assessment. At 2,000 plus VAT, you can see there my VAT calculation is slightly off. I like to deal in round figures, but it is the best value feasibility study you will ever commission. You've heard from Mark there, or you've heard rather initially from Brian about why we need to go in the direction we're going, and you've heard from Mark that they have EirGrid have the technical expertise to deliver. So the grid is going to be developed. It is your golden opportunity, communities across the country, to jump in and be part of the future. And we would suggest to you as well, sign up with Community Power. Be part of the change you would like to see. Thank you for your time. If we don't get to all your questions during the Q&A, feel free to contact the office or myself directly. And once we're all vaccinated, we will be resuming our site visits to the wind farm in Temple-Derry, but also we will be putting Claremorris. JP Prendergast has very kindly offered to run field trips to Claremorris, and the folks in Tuam are up for doing the same thing as well. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Bill. That's an excellent presentation. Now, I'd like to, before Mark goes off, see, is there any questions that maybe you'd like him to field? I know he will be able to, Owen Kennedy will also be there as well to answer some questions. So I'm just looking for a signal from anybody who wants to ask a question by raising their hand. I'm just going through the names in case people feel they have a question to ask. I don't see a hand. There are questions in the chat, and I'm going to take them. I'll just take 3 questions, but as I said, you are free to ask a question if you so wish. Okay, there is a question, one very direct question. It might be Mark, I don't know. What's the state of the Celtic interconnector? That's a question that was asked here in the chat.
Great, great question. Actually, it's about to go into planning. Actually, very, very shortly, we'll be making the lodgement of the formal planning application to onboard Planola. The previous big milestones where we made the decision on where the converter station was going to be located in Ballyadam in East Cork. And of course, the previous big milestone was the securing of 530 million in grant funding from the EU. So full steam ahead. We would hope to be out of planning late this year, maybe early into next year. And we'll be starting early stage procurement in parallel while we're in planning. So it's going really, really well. Great partnership with the French and a fantastic project for Ireland Inc.
And this could be, thank you very much, could be another one for you, because I'm just conscious of your time. The EirGrid strategy around long duration energy storage. I don't know if that you can take or if somebody else can take that question.
Well, thanks be to goodness Owen Kennedy's on the call here.
Okay,
I'm
Owen.
going to do an offload to my good colleague Owen.
Thanks very much, Mark. Owen.
Morning, everybody. Yeah, it's a great question. I think most of the interest from developers to date has been around short duration batteries, which is really to provide us with system services. So these are the services we need to manage the stability of the network and of the grid. But I think there has been recently quite a bit of interest in looking at longer duration batteries, which can, arbitrage energy and contribute in other ways, I suppose, and store renewable energy. So as the battery technology progresses, which it's progressing at quite a fast rate, I think we're going to see more of that on the grid. And of course, all of that is welcome in terms of helping us to meet our renewable targets.
Billy Murphy, you have a few questions. Do you want to come in and ask one of them, or I can ask it on your behalf? Billy, you can unmute there.
Well, the Celtic interconnector was one of the questions I put up there. So I think that project will be a game changer in the future, possibly. And Bill's presentation answered a lot of my questions. I'd probably be on to him directly some stage. Bill, thank you for that. That's all, Seamus. Yeah,
that's okay. And just checking, is there anybody else, because we're going to go to the breakout. I see the chat room has been very busy because people have been answering the questions as quick as they've been asked. And I think that's a great thing. We will look at all these questions, and where they haven't been answered, I can tell you there will be an answer given. And just that we've advertised widely on these and the other workshops, and we'll be talking about those later. But if you want to spread the word and help us reach even more people, we are asking you to do so. I think the main other question I see coming up there, it's a question of, I suppose, Bill, maybe I'll let you take it. Can anybody else do what you've been doing? Is it hard to get going, or what do you need in order to get started?
When I look at what has been done in Claremorris and Tuam over the past 2 years, and what we're currently doing for Res 2, it is hard to explain to people how easy it is in comparison to building Temple-Derry back in the day with no supports. The government are actually trying to help communities now. So it is relatively easy. The first section, identify a plot of land in your locality, folks. That's all you got to do. Get in touch with us. We'll fill out the form for you for that grid connection assessment. And it's one step at a time. And it can be done very quickly. This network is going to be expanded, and communities should get on board.
Well done, Billy. I know you're generating a lot of interest. I think it's a question from Senator Paddy Burke, maybe.
Yeah, thanks, Seamus. I'd like to ask Bill, what size of land or portion of ground would you need for the community power development?
Yeah, at the upper limit, right? 20 acres will give you a 5 megawatt solar farm, right? Now, that is as big a project as communities are allowed to do at the moment, 5 megawatts, right? So 20, if you say to yourself 20 acres, now, it can be less than that, of course. You can go right down to literally 2 acres, right? But that's a small project, right? Having said that, I'll take the example of Claremorris. We helped them to put in their Res 1 application last year, and they were successful. And what did the lads do? They no sooner had the bit between their teeth, and for Res 2, they put in another application across town, just on the other side of Claremorris. So another 20 acres, right? So if that one is acceptable, you can go again, right? You can go multiple times, right? Because remember, there is an insatiable appetite for green electricity, particularly as we try and address heat and transport. So a plot of land in about 20 acres, that will see with a 5 megawatt solar farm or less for wind. Right?
Okay, final question that I see coming in, and just on actually my phone, it's just come in because somebody mustn't been able to manage. And maybe this is for Mark, or maybe it's for generally, maybe Brian as well. And it's very simple. What happens if we get this wrong? It's a very general question. I know, Brian, you in your introduction gave a clear indication of what was required. But what happens if we don't achieve the targets set out by the various international agreements? What happens then? Is that too pessimistic a question to ask? But I'm asking it anyway.
No, I think it's a great question. And I've been grappling with this since the publication of the bill last week. I mean, we've set ourselves a huge ambition to halve our greenhouse gas emissions over a decade. No other country has done that. And the question, I'll just say one thing, that the question of achievability, I think, is being is much different asking that question now than, say, 14 months ago. We're going through a pandemic, and the response in terms of policy, politicians listening to the science, in terms of the way in which we've done things that would have been unheard of in a pre-COVID scenario, and the way society has kind of responded and engaged with the measures on the basis of what was needed to tackle a medical emergency. I think that puts a new framing around the question of achievability. And certainly if I'd seen the targets that were for emissions reduction that were published last week, if I'd seen them 14 months ago, I would have said, well, probably unlikely to meet them based on what we've done to date. Whereas now I think it's a different framing of the question. It's much less clear to me that that things cannot be achieved if we set our mind to it, if we actually pull together, if we engage constructively. In terms of what happens if we don't meet the targets, globally, we're going to see more storms, more destruction, impacting on people's livelihoods and people's lives. But I'm not a doomsday. I don't subscribe to the doomsday scenario frame of mind. I think it's a call to action, and I would suggest that, and of course, if we don't meet our EU targets, then we face fines. I mean, we have EU targets that are mandatory and that we're obliged to meet. It's less clear to me in terms of the legislation that we're setting national targets, setting our own targets, what the penalties are, what mechanisms are in place. I think really that what I see is that these targets are a call to action in a way we've never had before. We've come through a COVID pandemic where a call to action means something different, and we've shown that we can do things differently. So I'm quite hopeful, I have to say, in terms of the prospects. And if you look at the benefits that will come, because it's not just that we reduce emissions, if we do what's required, we've warmer homes, we've less air pollution, we've greater well-being. We have so the positives far outweigh any negatives or any challenges. Now I've brought in a few different threads there, so I'm not sure if I fully answered the question, but my sense is that we have a much greater opportunity to tackle this than I would have thought 14 months ago, pre-COVID, and how we've engaged with that, and we should embrace it, and the positives far outweigh the negatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's more coming in as well, but I'm going to leave it there. Look, for those who want the presentations to be posted, please get in touch with Irish Rural Link and we will make sure you get them. That's not a problem. I see that somebody has been asking for that and a few others as well. We want you to get as much of this information as possible. And as Mark Foley said earlier on, it doesn't matter whether it's via email or Twitter or whatever, or the simple postcard or the simple letter. Please get your comments in, and if you want this information posted to you, we will organize that as well. Okay, I'm going to hand over to James Claffey, who is going to explain the breakout sessions, and that will give you a chance to discuss in greater detail the subject of this morning's presentations. Thank you.
This is us coming back from group one here.
Oh, good. I think everybody is pretty much back, I think.
Yeah.
I'm conscious some people may have left, but look, let's hear some of the feedback. I know I was at one of the groups myself, some interesting feedback. So maybe I would go to the facilitators or whoever they nominated, and you can tell me. So maybe Shane, your group would, or whoever you've nominated.
I was nominated. I was putting goals in my group.
Oh, good.
So I'll attempt to feedback on this, and you can interject if I've missed some points. Now I'll just unmute myself so I don't need to hold spacebar. Yeah. The main question, I suppose, is where should this be located? We had some great expertise in our group. We had both community members who live literally in the shadows of some of this. We have others that have worked on consultations around much longer term stuff. There was also overlaps with cultural heritage and our own national heritage. But also then we had some more scientific engineering perspectives from our group as well. One of the key issues that was raised by a couple of different people in our group was the concept of microgeneration. In other words, disaggregating the generation system either nationally or certainly to a smaller scale to maybe at a domestic scale. One concept that was raised was powering the electric fence at the end of your field with local solar generation, which was fascinating. And that linked into the community-based energy schemes that were talked about in the overall presentations. And one of our members of the group there talked about how whether if there was a wind turbine outside my window and down the end of our field or at the top of that hill there, we would have much greater support for that if there was more community benefit from that, both in terms of engagement and co-implementation, co-design at an earlier stage, but then also in terms of the benefits that we might get from that in terms of revenue, ultimately, I suppose. We then talked about where this generation, if it does need to be large-scale generation, where should that be based? And ultimately, from our group anyway, it seems to be the case that locating it near where it is required is most important. So let's say around Dublin or near those data centres that need it. But there's also then a discontinuity between the fact that it's windiest in the west coast and it's sunniest in the southeast, and neither of those places are near Dublin or near those big data centres. The third point then is around those particular data centres and the location of those, and the fact that a lot of them are aiming towards offsetting their own corporate carbon budgets, and I mean that's their prerogative and they're still building it and investing, but a lot of that isn't even national carbon credits. It's not going into our nationally determined contributions. It may in fact be offshored to somewhere on mainland Europe. And that's definitely not engaging with communities, and it's not providing a community benefit, it was thought. So they were the main points. Have I missed anything from anybody in our group? Unmute and shout if I have.
Just really at what cost, Shane, about our landscape and about looking after and taking care of our environment and our precious ecology, our biodiversity, our precious landscape, and particularly our special areas of conservation, and where we locate these infrastructure.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I suppose that the main point being that it is never going to be perfect with any of this, that there's, I suppose if you were looking at a mapping system, there's always going to be those different layers, the cultural, the environmental, the social, the economic as well, and the physical. It's windy there, it's sunny here. And that's very hard to get right in all of these locations. So that was us. Yeah, wrap up, pass on.
Thank you, Shane, and thank you, Cornelia, for coming in there as well. Eileen, can I go to you now?
You can, of course. Yeah, we had very similar kind of things. Where they should be located, with the sea was mentioned, because there'd be, you know, less people living there. We also had the one about the conservation area. Like 400 meters was one of the suggestions, where it's going to be near the Black Stairs. Glendalough was also mentioned. There was a bit of discussion around the consultations and all that. So get the word out there is kind of the message I'm putting back here. That there was a bit of disappointment that it was a bit, you know, the time and the short notice and that as well. Near the grid, yes, but near where it's needed, a bit like what you were saying in the last group, near the hubs. But as well as that, you know, there's other areas in Dublin that could be looked at. The Phoenix Park was mentioned for one of them as well, probably. And then we had discussion about cables and that as well, underground versus overground, and kind of came to a conclusion there. There was the pros and cons for both. And that was really it.
Okay, thanks very much, Eileen and Shane. I think that there was some certainly exciting and interesting and passionate discussions in those groups, certainly the one I was in as well, and I'd imagine for the other one as well. I mean, we're coming to the concluding remarks, and I'll do some in the moment. But before I do, I don't know if Brian or Owen Kennedy is there, or Bill would like to just give some concluding remarks, if you're there.
Yeah, I'm here, Seamus.
Please.
Happy to do so on behalf of EirGrid. And I suppose, firstly, thanks to yourself, Seamus, for chairing this morning, and to Irish Rural Link for facilitating this. I think it's been a great session. You know, a lot of engagement, really great engagement all the way through it. I just want to thank all the speakers this morning. I think I caught the end of Bill Kelly's presentation with Tipperary Energy Agency. It was really interesting in terms of how communities can get involved. I was at the as Shane said, Shane McGuinness said there, I was on the breakout session 1. Some really interesting points been put forward, lots of considerations to take into account, you know, and really the concerns, I suppose, of communities and you know, were quite clearly articulated during that, and also I suppose some of the opportunities that are there for contributing to renewable energy and to doing our bit, and even down to things such as energy efficiency, as Shane suggested. So that was really interesting, and it's great to hear that. From our side, I think, as I understand it, there will be a report produced, which will be published, and I think this presentation, as I understand it, Shane, as well, also be on the Irish Rural Link website, which is really positive. I would, as others have suggested, just want to emphasize that we really would like to get your correspondence and your input in writing as part of this consultation. I think that's really important to put it on the record, what your views are on all of this. And really, we want to reach as many people as possible. We're doing a lot of engagement, right across the country, and we want to get as much feedback. So please spread the word if you can, and we look forward to considering all the feedback and to publishing a plan later in the year. So once again, thanks very much for today, and I'll put you back to Seamus. Thanks, Seamus.
Thank you very much, Owen. I really appreciate those comments. And unless anybody else wants to say anything before I do my own concluding remarks, I see Rory O'Muraku. Have you your hand up, or is no, you haven't, or maybe you have? I don't know.
No, I don't. It's okay.
Oh, it's okay. I just thought I saw you. Bill, please come on.
Just to say, Seamus, to the listeners generally, it's a wonderful opportunity to become involved. You know, I don't think ever before there's been, I think, as Mark referred to it, such a broadly based consultation. You know, it in that sense it's brilliant, and hats off to Rural Link and to EirGrid for taking the initiative here. And even at our own level, in terms of generating power, get involved. You know, it has never been more inclusive and democratic in a sense. And the old adage of leave nobody behind in this greening of the grid. So yes, speak with your feet, become involved, I would say to people. Thank you to Ruralink for making this happen.
Well, thank you, Bill. And, you know, I suppose just on a very personal level, I'm always interested in, you know, when the community takes charge of activity, no matter what it is. And in rural Ireland, I cut my teeth many years ago in organising water schemes and stuff like that. And it was always in rural Ireland, the communities pulled things together and come up with solutions. And I think what I find all the time is solutions are there, but we do have to reach out to as many people as possible, and we do have to allow communities to look at the solutions in terms of how do we achieve the overall objectives of climate change, and indeed the provision of electricity, because at the end of the day we do want a living rural Ireland. We don't want a dead rural Ireland or a rural Ireland where there are no people involved. And we saw a great launch yesterday by government spokespeople. You know, we have to hope that that launch is followed up with action as well. But it is about keeping people in their own area. And, you know, there was a great discussion about, you know, oh, we can't afford broadband and all of that. Nobody is talking about that now. We now know broadband is the lifeblood of any community, of any part of Ireland, you know, and we've learned this the hard way with COVID. So this discussion is coming to an end today. I would like to thank EirGrid for asking us to host this. I would like to thank the speakers, Brian O'Gallagher, Mark Foley, of course, and Bill Kelly. And I would like to thank you, people who have joined in. Yes, we can always look for more people, but you're the very first workshop we've held. There's 5 others. We have one on, I think James was telling me, I might get him to remind me, on the 15th of April next. I think that's a 7 to 9 p.m. So you'll hear information on that. We are very clear. We want as many people as possible to get involved. We want you to spread the word, as Owen pointed out in his concluding remarks, because the more people get to say what it is they believe should happen, whether it is the merits of overground, underground, where things should be situated, how they should be managed, how the community should be involved. All of this is essential, because at the end of the day, we all live on the same island in the same community, and we do need to try and come up with solutions and share whatever it is on a proper, equal and just way. So to all of you who joined in this morning, who joined in the chat, certainly your comments will be noted and remarked. As James has said, we will send the presentations to anybody who wants them. They're there via email as well, and they will be on the websites. We'll make sure that happens. And of course, there will be a report completed by Irish Ruralink at the end of the 6 workshops. Hopefully, we will capture the broad range of opinion, some of which we heard this morning. So appreciate your time given up today. Spread the word. The next one is on the 15th of April between 7 and 9 p.m. Get the details on the IRL website, or indeed I'm sure on the EirGrid website, and tell as many people as you can. So with that, thank you. I hope you have a nice day for the rest of the day, and enjoy your lunch and reflect on the Ireland you want to live in. Thank you very much.